There are some of you who probably seated here tonight who will honestly say, do you know, Ravi, if I really saw God appear in a vision or God appear in a dream or God appear in a lighted figure in my room, I believe fondly that I would actually follow him. I believe I would follow him. Do you know there was somebody who said that to God, somebody who said that to Christ? The story of the rich man and Lazarus, the leper. Lazarus dies and goes to heaven, and the rich man who resisted God dies and goes to hell. And there's a conversation that's told in that story. And the rich man says, look, why don't you send an angel to go and talk to my 5 brothers who are already there on earth? Tell them about the truth of this. And God says, no, they already have Moses and the prophets. He says, yeah, but if somebody goes from this side of reality, from this side, to go over into the world and warn them, they will follow him. And Jesus said, no, they wouldn't. They already have Moses and the prophets. I'm convinced if God gave you a supernatural moment, your days will go by, weeks will go by, and you'll start asking yourself, did that really happen? Was that really my imagination? He gives to you the true word of prophecy, the certainty of God himself, and promises when you invite him into your life, you will have the greatest supernatural experience ever of God not only changing what you do, but changing what you want to do. And as your spirit is knit with his spirit, you experience the purpose for which God has created you. Why did Jesus turn this temptation down? Do you know why I think he did so clearly in such strong terms? Because if Jesus was not able to trust his Father to deliver him in that instance, how was he going to trust his Father to protect him while he was on the cross? This is really the temptation before Christ that would have sidetracked him away from the cross. And I say to you as candidly as I can, as strongly as I can, that the cross stands as the central feature of the gospel message, because in the cross, everything you and I believe in material terms is challenged. It challenges our seeking power. It challenges the right to use that power. He tells us of the simplicity of life itself and the profundity of what happens when we understand what is happening on those 2 pieces of timber, when Jesus says, for this very cause did I come into the world. Because the cross describes for you and me in real terms what sin is. You see the horror of it. You see the darkness of it. I don't know if I've ever seen it more darkly and more ghastly fashion. And for those of you who have seen our video series, Deliver Us from Evil, you'll see some of those pictures on there. When I was in Auschwitz, visiting what had happened there during the war, and just a few years ago visiting Poland, and as I was taken to Auschwitz for the first time, to see the horror of what a handful of men and women had brought into this world, to see the pictures of young boys castrated, and how Joseph Mengele had experimented upon their minds, the horror of what sin really is. And Eichmann in his trial just trivialized it all. I say to you, the cross stands in reality to remind us that sin is real. Dr. Donald Gray Barnhouse tells of the time that after he lost his wife early in their marriage and was left with such little children, Dr. Barnhouse, who was known as the famed illustrator, was challenged by his little daughter who said, Daddy, I have a question for you. You keep telling us that Jesus died for our sins. If Jesus died for our sins, why did Mommy still have to die? He said, sweetheart, I don't know if I can answer that immediately for you so that you can understand it. Give me a few days. I'll find a way to apply it for you. A couple of days went by. They were heading for the funeral. They were sitting in the funeral car. It was a bright, sunny day. And they came to a stop at a traffic light, and a huge truck was parked in front of the funeral car. And Dr. Barnhouse's mind began to work, and he looked at his little daughter and he said, sweetie, can I ask you a question? Do you see that truck in front? She said, yes. He said, do you see the shadow of the truck on the sidewalk? She said, yes, Daddy, I see it. He said, if you had to be run over, would you rather be run over by the shadow of the truck or by the truck itself? She managed to smile and she said, Daddy, why would I want to be run over by the truck? It'll hurt a lot more. I'd rather be run over by the shadow. It wouldn't hurt as much. He put his arm around her. He said, next time you see the cross, remember this. When Jesus went to the cross for you, the truck of God's judgment went over him. It's only the shadow of death that goes over you and me now. The reality of the cross. Billy Graham once said to us, a handful of evangelists in a room while we were having lunch together before the Amsterdam conference began, where he'd invited us to speak. He said, "Gentlemen, let me remind you of something." He said, "When I was young in my ministry, one day I spoke at a campaign. Stadium was full, but there was no response at the invitation. And I walked back to my room brokenhearted, and I cried in the room. I said, something was wrong tonight. Something was wrong with me. It was not with the people. What was wrong? Why did nobody respond to that invitation?" And one of his best friends, who had the courage to say this to him, put his arm around him and said, "Billy, can I say something to you?" He said, "You went out there to preach the gospel, didn't you?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Billy, you did not even mention the cross once. Where is the gospel apart from the cross?" There was no gospel, Billy. There was no gospel. Billy Graham said he cried so hard that day, recognizing he had gone out there to do many other things and preach the gospel, but he left the most important thing out. He said, "From that day I made a promise. I will never ever speak anywhere on any subject without mentioning the cross." Check it out next time you hear him. You will never hear him talking about anything on any subject without bringing the cross in. That cross is for you. You see, if your real problem is spiritual, then the answer is real too. It is in the cross. What does the cross do? It starts off by taking the penalty for you and offering forgiveness. Let me just illustrate that and move to my final point, which I'll keep brief here. A few weeks ago, we were in Singapore doing some meetings, and it was the last Sunday, and Henry was there, and several others in the audience here were there. It was one of the most precious meetings you would ever have wanted to be in your life. I was weary from many days of preaching. It was the message I least looked forward to. And yet at the end of that meeting, there was something so treasured. In my 25 years of ministry, I have put that down in my prayer journal as one of the most tender days that I have ever walked with God and sensed his nearness. Something happened that morning where the Spirit of God just moved in that hotel ballroom, and so many who'd been resistant earlier on in the week came to Christ. Just before I left for the train station, a woman came up to the front while there were many there, and she just clasped me by the hand and she said, "Can I tell you something very personal? I never ever thought I would say this to anybody." She said, "This is Sunday morning now." She said, "On Friday I came back from school." She said, "I'm an elementary school teacher. I was so angry with God. I was so fed up with God. In my heart, I just said, I don't want to have anything to do with you." She said, "Ravi, I went over to my bookshelf and I took my Bible and I literally ripped it to as many small pieces as I could possibly do it in my anger. And I stomped on that Bible and said, I will never have anything anymore to do with you again." And she just ripped that Bible to shreds. And then she started to cry. She said, "And as you were preaching today, a friend of mine brought me here. Why, I don't know, because I told God I want to have nothing to do with him, and I ripped the Bible to shreds. Why I came here, I don't know." She said, "But halfway through your message," and then she really started to cry. She said, "You said something that overwhelmed me." She said, "You quoted a poem from an elementary school teacher as she dealt with a little boy who had messed up on his test. And this is the way the poem went, and I quoted it. The teacher said, 'He came to my desk with a quivering lip. The lesson was done. Have you a new sheet for me, dear teacher? I've spoiled this one.' I took his sheet all soiled and blotted, gave him a new one all unspotted, and into his tired heart I cried, 'Do better now, my child.' I went to the throne with a trembling heart. The day was done. 'Have you a new day for me, dear master? I've spoiled this one.' He took my day all soiled and blotted, gave me a new one all unspotted, and into my tired heart he cried, 'Do better now, my child.'" She said, "Out of that 50-minute message of yours, that little poem just stabbed me. I was like that elementary school teacher. I need to have a new day. Will God give me a new beginning today?" You see, ask anyone who's gone wrong what a thrill it is to be forgiven. Ask anyone who's gone wrong what a thrill it is to be told you're forgiven. No matter what your opinion and position may have been on Jim Baker, Read his book, I Was Wrong. He'll tell of the time he was cleaning the latrines in jail, and his overalls were covered with splashes from the bathroom there. When the guard came to him and said, there's a guest who wants to see you. He said, I didn't want to see anybody. He said, this guest wants to see you. You'll want to see him. He said, I started to go towards the waiting room, and the guard asked me, are you going to go like this? He said, yeah, this is my life now. Why not? He said, I didn't realize why that question was even raised. He shared this at CBA conference, the Christian Booksellers Association. And he says, I walked over to the room, and all of a sudden, to my utter shock and surprise, I looked over, there stood Billy Graham and his wife Ruth. And he walked straight over towards me and wrapped his arms around me. And he said, and I cried and cried what my life had come to. And here was a man who had lived such a pure life who wanted to wrap his arms around me. Folks, I got some greater news than Billy Graham wrapping his arms around you. God himself did it on the cross.